The amount of the tariff effects, the size of the tariff effects, their duration and the time it will take are all highly uncertain. So that is why we think the appropriate thing to do is to hold where we are as we learn more. And we think our policy stance is in a good place where we're well positioned to react to incoming developments. We have to be forward-looking, and the thing that every forecaster, every outside forecaster, and the Fed is saying is that we expect a meaningful amount of inflation to arrive in coming months.
So, Larry, we heard from the Federal Reserve, the FOMC, as well as Chair Powell this week. What did you make out of what they had to say, and particularly their projections?
I thought what they said was both predictable and reasonable. You can't be changing monetary policy with the uncertainty that we've got right now. They were right to signal that they were being cautious about future changes. What struck me most, David, was a quite remarkable combination. The dot plot showed unemployment revised upwards, showed inflation revised upwards, even a period when we're getting good news about artificial intelligence and productivity and good news about oil. So you see a supply shock coming, even though the natural sources of supply shocks aren't there. What is it? It's the tariffs. We're imposing a supply shock on ourselves, and that's leading to expectations of both higher inflation and higher unemployment, making the Fed's job that much more difficult. And the Fed's obviously not going to get in a political war with the administration, but the stark analytic fact is clear. It doesn't happen that often that the Fed revises up on inflation and unemployment at the same time. And I don't think there's ever been a time when they revised that way in both directions based on administration policy.
Larry, you mentioned the geopolitical conflict that we're seeing. Certainly, we have an enormous one between Israel and Iran as we speak, with questions about whether the United States might get involved. As a macroeconomist, how do you approach that question?
Look, no one knows. I suspect that the president doesn't know completely what he's going to do because he is watching events. I'd just say a couple things, David. One is that we got a lot of divisions within our country, but I would hope that at a moment like this, with respect to the kind of threat that Iran represents, that there'd be a lot of desire to come together and support policies that will put the greatest stability possible in. Second thing I would advise your listeners, what I do to track very complex events and spheres where I don't have deep expertise is I look for prediction markets. Prediction markets aren't perfect. They're sometimes wrong, just like the stock market is sometimes wrong about the earnings of companies, but they do represent an aggregation of opinion based on people who are prepared to put some money where their mouths are. And the experience now in many spheres, from elections to geopolitical events to movie releases, is that prediction markets have very good track records relative to experts. And what prediction markets are saying is quite interesting. They're saying that the odds of a U.S. attack on Iran are close to 2/3 by the end of this month, close to 3/4 by the end of next month, and that it's a substantial chance, well above 50%, that the supreme leader in Iran will be out of office by the end of this year. So what prediction markets are judging is likely to happen is potentially quite tumultuous. And I think that anyone trying to judge the situation as they form their portfolio would be well advised not to rely only on that, but to give those prediction market judgments weight as they make their own judgments.
If those predictions came true, and as you say, we don't know, but let's assume that happened, that in fact the United States did get involved and that the Supreme Leader left and there was a regime change in Iran, what would that mean economically? What sectors of the economy would you look at? When we all think about oil, for example, I've also seen food prices raised in terms of fertilizer out of Iran. What sectors do you think might be affected the most?
I think David, I would quibble with you in one respect. I think when you say something's got a 60% chance of happening, you're saying that it's a 60% chance of happening, and there's no such thing as the prediction coming true or the prediction coming false. Either the 60% thing will happen or the 40% thing will happen. So I would choose a somewhat different locution than you did. But to your question, I'd be looking primarily at oil and petrochemicals more generally, fossil fuels more generally, and that, of course, includes fertilizers, includes plastics.
Larry, to be a bit more parochial, at least for us in New York City, we have a mayoral election coming up, including a primary in the Democratic Party. And we have a fairly stark contrast in economic approaches of the two leading candidates, who are Andrew Cuomo, you know well, more of a traditional, it seems to be, Democrat, and a man named Zohran Mamdani, who seems to have a much more extreme, many people think, economic platform. What do you make of that?
David, in a sense, every American is a citizen of New York. It's so much a cultural and financial hub of our country that what happens in New York is consequential for all of us. And I'm not an expert on the exigencies of the details of New York City economic policy, but I do think the Democratic Socialist program would be profoundly dangerous for New York, for the Democratic Party, and for the United States. Set of measures: free college, free childcare, free mass transit, rent control, huge increases in the minimum wage, financed only with tax increases on the wealthy mobile wealthy, who will prove to be mobile if this program is enacted, will, I think, be extremely dangerous. I have warned again and again on your show about the dangers of economic populism of the kind President Trump has followed, talking about Juan Perón, talking about the dangers of tariffs many times. Frankly, the Democratic Socialist candidate is more populist and more dangerous in his approach on the narrow set of economic issues, even than President Trump. And I think if he were to be selected, it would brand the Democratic Party in a highly problematic way. It would suggest that the debate within the Democratic Party was between the Warren Sanders wing and measures that are even more extreme than theirs in terms of the politics of envy, in terms of government control of the economy.